I'm going to pass over to Fred at this point. Now, Fred Deakin, who is the chairman of the Cornwall Astronomy Society, and will be giving his talk this evening on automated astrophotography and everything to do with that. So let me just get you on the screen here, Fred, and then we'll get going. Here we go.
Perfect. Thank you very much, Ben. Let me just get myself sorted out onto here a second.
That's all looking good.
Right, good evening, everyone. As Ben has said, my name is Fred Deakin. I'm a very keen astronomer and astrophotographer. Astrophotography is the art, and quite often it is an art, of imaging the night sky. I'm also chairman, as Ben said, of the Cornwall Astronomy Society. Tonight, I'd like to give you a very short glimpse of how my astrophotography is done through the automation process, and in particular, how automated astrophotography has changed the lives of many busy people like myself. Unfortunately, I have to work full-time, and many people like me have limited time for their hobbies, especially if they're done during the night. For instance, I can't stay up all night when I've got to make a crust during the daytime. Now, I'm sure when you hear this, that it's going to be fairly quick slides as I go through. It is quite a complex subject, but I've brought it down as far as I can, I think, for a fairly short one tonight. But I think you'll understand why us night sky imagers do our imaging the way we do when I've finished. Now, I do have a Facebook page and a YouTube channel. There you can find videos and articles that not only support what I'm going to be talking about tonight, but also I've got many tutorials on how to take images, different ways to do astrophotography, even how to process your images after you've taken them. I've moved more from astronomy to astrophotography about 10 years ago, so I've got a bit of experience now. And during that time, I've learned a lot. As always, I've learned by my mistakes rather than my successes. And believe me, there's been a lot of mistakes. But it's got to the stage now over the last sort of 3 or 4 years where I'm really reaping the rewards of spending so much time learning and going through those mistakes. I will start with a very brief bit of history on how astrophotography has exploded as a hobby in recent years. Then we'll go through the basics, what is actually needed to take a photograph of a target in the night sky, and moving on, I'll give you a brief description of what equipment I use, including the software and the order that's taken to create pretty pictures. Lastly, I'll show you how to put everything together. We can see how the photographs are taken, how it's possible to take complete sets of images all through the night and still get a good night's sleep. So if we start at the beginning, over the millennia, people have always been looking up at the stars. Astronomy as a science, especially at its complete primal level, is the easiest science of all, because all you need to do to study it is look up. Now, the human eye has an equivalent shutter speed to a camera of about 1/25 of a second. Even looking through a telescope, that shutter speed in our brains stays the same. When imaging in the dark, there's very little you can pick up in 1/25 of a second, only the brightest of stars and the planet, obviously the moon. Light is usually stretched as it travels through the cosmos as well, and those stretches mean the wavelengths get longer, and our eyes aren't attuned to even pick those up at all. With longer wavelengths, views through a scope tend to be just black and white and shades of grey rather than in colour, which you see on most astrophotography photos. And you need longer exposure times to be able to get that colour. Now, in 1986, Nikon came up with the first DSLR camera, which was a CCD with a CCD image sensor. Other than very few scientists beforehand, no one had really got to grips with imaging the night sky. However, with the new CCD that Nikon came up with, we could take long exposures of 10 seconds, 1 minute, 5 minutes, half an hour, sometimes even more. And with that jump in exposure time, more and more detail of the night sky could be achieved. Just sort this out a minute. On the 1st of April 1995, the Hubble Space Telescope took an image of the Heart of the Eagle Nebula, showing the famous Pillars of Creation. This was the first time that most people on our planet had even seen a nebula. It was also the first time that astronomers, of which there have been very few attempting photographing the night sky before, realized that they could now point their new charge-coupled device cameras to the sky and capture amazing sights such as the Pillars of Creation. And later on, we'll actually see my version. Sorry, screen going a bit funny. Since about 2004, there has been an explosion in people wanting to do astrophotography. And in most of it, in the early days especially, it was fueled by the images of the Hubble Space Telescope. In the last 5 or so years, there's been almost exponential growth in the hobby. And for the first time, astrophotographers have now taken over in numbers to regular astronomers, which use eyepieces to look and see what's up there. There is no doubt of what you can see through the eyepiece is a lot more personal, but it's not as detailed or spectacular as views from long exposure images. The only problem which blights both camps is that, unlike space telescopes, which are above our atmosphere, we are looking through a big, constantly changing lens. However, astrophotographers found out that by taking lots of images of a target rather than just one, they could in effect stack those images on top of each other and average out the atmosphere, which keeps changing. They could actually cancel out most of the effects of the atmosphere, and there came another vast leap for imaging in the heavens. I don't know whether you can see this very well, but you have got a very noisy image on the single frame. There's not half as much detail, especially if you zoom in, as if you just stack sort of 15 frames together, which I did for this example. So let's take a brief minute to work out what's needed to take a long exposure images of the night sky. Firstly, and most important, is a telescope or camera mount. Now, I say that's more important than the camera and the telescope itself, because it really is the thing that makes everything work. The Earth rotates, creating days and nights, and the skies, because of that rotation, move in a large arc from east across the south to west. It was a problem to track against this movement until the German equatorial mount was developed. The equatorial mount compensates for the Earth's rotation by having a rotational axis parallel to the Earth's axis of rotation. This was actually developed many, many years before by astronomers, but now as the astrophotographers, mount of choice. Next, and it really is secondary to the mount, is the camera itself. Now, it can be with proprietary lenses or more commonly using a telescope as a lens. These cameras are usually connected to a shutter release cable, or used to be, but now, especially for automation of astrophotography, has to be connected directly to a computer, which does all the work. A focuser is the next major thing, and again, recently these have moved from manual twist knobs to motors being fitted straight onto them, so the computers can take control of the focus itself, and we'll see that a little bit later on. We'll gloss over other things, albeit cheap things like heaters and things like that that are needed inside, when we're doing automated astrophotography. Computers do check on the heater of the telescope and various parts of the telescope throughout the night, but we don't need to worry about that at the moment, just the basics. The last thing that I do want to say, though, is for truly long exposures, especially if you're imaging over sort of 10 or 20 minutes of exposure, is a guide camera. This camera would specifically be used to constantly take short exposures of a patch of sky. It would focus in directly on a single star, and then it will track that star. And every time that star moves, the finest of corrections will be sent to the motors of the mount, thus making sure that the main camera looking through the telescope or lens appears not to move in its field of view at all. To show how precise these mounts are, typical corrections from my mount sent from my guide camera are in the order of a thickness of a human hair from about 50 feet. Now, put all that together and connect a computer, which is located with, which is loaded with appropriate software, and modern day automated astrophotography is possible. Now, although a scope with this sort of configuration seems to resemble something between a sci-fi part and an explosion in a cable factory, if each part of it is that I've just described is broken down and taken in isolation, then it's quite easy to understand what each part does, and all the wires are just individual wires coming off of individual parts. It's not really as bad as it looks. On this particular telescope and on the ones that I do, you have to connect them to a computer. And in this case, that red box on top of my telescope is a computer itself, similar to a laptop computer. With it being right on the scope, the connections don't have much of a problem with signals getting through. USB is notoriously bad at night, and especially when it's, temperature changes from the day to night and things like that. Also with this computer, although it is almost a standard computer, it has got a power distribution module in it, which provides power for the camera, focuser, dew heaters, etc. And there's a very quick thing showing you the computer. It is essentially, though, just a PC running Windows 10. And instead of having that red computer on there, I could just as easily have all the leads running to a laptop on the side. So let's have a quick look at the software, and I'll explain roughly how it works. There are many different software packages you can use. I use Sequence Generator Pro, but there's Nina, which is a free one now, and a few others. It doesn't have to cost the earth, this hobby. Albeit I've paid a little bit more for Sequence Generator Pro than a lot of software. The thing is, I've been doing this for a long time, got a lot of equipment, but free versions of a lot of astrophotography software are available. The first and most complicated part of any piece of software is setting it up in the first place. I won't go through all of it, but basically you have to find out the information of every single part of your equipment and enter the details of that equipment into the software. When the main bits are done, like the telescope, camera and mount, you have to enter details of other things that you may have included, like filters or filter wheels themselves. There's a couple of screens of the setup for Sequence Generator. Depending on your imaging camera and what sort of data you want, filters can be placed in front of the lens to change the wavelengths of light that are allowed to hit the camera sensor, or reject so they never make it that far. With astrophotography, we use a wide range of different filters, either to split the light in the spectrum to colors like red, green, blue, or also to split colors emitted from gases like hydrogen, ionized oxygen, ionized sulfur. As it happens, the same gases, they're hydrogen, oxygen, and sulfur, are the ones that are emitted in explosions, which basically is what nebula are made of. Wheels of filters can be added in front of the camera lens, and are now common for electronically changing during an imaging session. As well as the main details for the imaging scope, a guide camera needs to be configured, as well as the software that be used to latch onto a guide star and then monitor it, change its position of the mount in minute steps so that the stars don't move in the field of view of the main camera. We also use software to determine the stars that we capture, where the stars are that we capture, where we're looking at, and this is called plate solving. After we've taken an image of part of the sky, we can run it through a plate solver, which will calculate the stars in that image, what brightness they are to each other, calculate the compound angles, and use that information to look up exactly where we're pointing. It'll come apparent in a minute or two while we do that. Once we've set everything up, we don't need to do that again. We need to find a target in the night sky that we want to image, and we enter the details of that target into the software. Most things in the sky have been pre-mapped out before, so we can take known coordinates and enter them. Quite often, the software and feedback information on how the image will look when you take it will be shown on the software, and when the best time is. Usually, the software will tell you when the best time is to actually image that object based on whereabouts its coordinates in the sky. You really want, when you're imaging something, you want it to be fairly high up in the sky, because if you're looking straight up, you're cutting through less of the atmosphere, and your images will be a lot cleaner. So what we do is we come up with or we're presented by the software when we want to put in a target, a list of blank cells, and all we do on this is fill up that list with what type of filter we're using, what exposures we may be using, whether it's 5 minute, 10 minute. You can use preset exposures or make them up yourself. And that's pretty much it. You list those in order of what filters, what exposures, and everything. And you've got to, I mean, on here you can see I've got repeat 10 on each one of these exposures. This because, again, I'm going to be stacking my images to reduce the noise, reduce the effects of the atmosphere on my final image. The software will then check that right, sorry, I'm moving forward a bit too fast. The next thing is to actually run the program, and what will happen, everything will happen in a certain order. The first thing that the software does is it will check the hardware is switched on, working, and it's able to send information backwards and forwards within the, back and forwards to the software from the mount, whichever cameras you're using, the dew heaters, the focuser, etc. If there's a problem at this stage, it's usually because the leader's fallen out or not pushed in enough, or the item's not switched on at all. If that happens, the software will normally just bug out. We can configure it to send us an email or a text or something like that if we're not in the vicinity of the software right from the word go. So the next part of the order, the software will then instruct the mount to point to a target in the sky, whichever one you've set. Often, especially with mobile setups that are not static in an observatory, for instance, the target won't end up being perfectly within the frame after the telescope's moved. Quite often it's not in the frame at all. When software thinks the scope is pointing in the right direction, it will use the camera to take a short test image. That test image, once taken, is then plate solved. When I said about plate solving, it will work out whereabouts exactly in the night sky it's looking. In this case, it's where the telescope is pointing. As I said, this could be far from its intended target. Even if it's nearly there, we want to get it right in the middle of the frame. Once the software knows where the telescope is pointing, it will send corrections to the mount to change the telescope direction, take another test shot, and keep doing it until the exact position is found. The software will then set up the guiding software, which will find a star and track onto it. If autofocusing is set, then it will go through a focus routine. This is done by first moving the focus motor, a set amount, and then taking an image. The image is then analysed by the software to measure exactly how tight and bright the stars are in the image. It continuously takes images and measuring the focus until it has created a V-curve, so it goes right through from one side of focus to the other. From that, it can work out across from being out of focus on both sides of the graph and knows exactly where the critical focus point is. It moves the focus motor to that exact point, and then there we have it, perfect focus. We're now pointing directly at the target. The target is now in focus. The guide camera is tracking the object. The software is now taking images according to the filters and exposure times listed out. What I'm going to do is actually show you this, not in real time. This is 20 times sped up. But this is a video I took of my telescope after I told it to image this this object is giving me a test image in the middle of the frame there, and I asked it to actually image, and you'll see it moving the telescope, trying to plate solve, then setting up the auto guider and focusing. So at the moment, it's just moved the telescope. It's trying to find where it is, found where it is. It's failed slightly. So it's moved the telescope and already it's found it. This is sped up, like I said, but gives you an idea. It's now focusing, and you can see every time it takes an image, it's plotting where that focus or how good the stars are, and it's found a critical focus point as being where those two lines meet. Next is setting up the auto guider, and what it does is it goes through a diagnostics routine first of all to double check where what angle the camera is working at, and whether the camera is actually set up right, whether the telescope is able to move, etc. And there we have it. Now it's starting to take images. And like I said, it's sped up an awful lot, but you can see the images slowly coming up on the screen. And once it's done, you can set that all night, and it will just change the filters, refocus every now and then, and promptly in the morning after you've got up, you can just find a whole load of images. Sometimes long exposures, 20 minutes is not unheard of, in fact very, very common. So I'll stop that now. Try and stop that now. There you go. Let's go back here. Often you don't have to just have one target throughout the night. You can have multiple targets in a given night, and you can get a group of cells for each target, which you can fill in with what exposures you want. Targets do have to be carefully decided on beforehand, as they do need to be in the right position in the sky when you want to try and image them. However, even with multiple targets, you can set up the software to do everything automatically. It will continue to monitor the images, the focus, the positioning, and even the heaters and things like that. If it finds something amiss, then it will do its best to correct it. And if not, and it can't correct it, the program will then either send out a very loud beep, which is my preferred method. My telescope room that I put a computer and talk to the telescope itself. It's right next to my bedroom, so it wakes me up every time. It can send an email or a text to say something has gone wrong as well. And then you just need to get up, go and see what's wrong and sort it out. If everything is set up correctly and clouds don't roll in though, an amateur astrophotographer can usually go to bed knowing that when they wake up, they will have a collection of frames. Also, as the images have been plate solved, it's actually possible, and indeed very, very common, I do it all the time, to take exposures over many nights, allowing for more and more detailed and perfected images to be taken. I have often, and would even say it is normal to take images over days, weeks, and even months on a single target. Now, I'm not affiliated with any of the following, but the approach I take to the software and the accessories on the telescope is very similar and or identical to ones that are popping up now for the general public to try their hands at, automated astrophotography like roboscopes, iTelescope, Insight. You can literally log on and you pay your dues, and then you can use the telescope exactly the same way I do. This way you can be miles, hundreds or even thousands of miles from the actual telescope you're controlling. I have a few times imaged using telescopes in Spain, Australia, New Mexico, and it's just the same as if I've got mine outside, except the weather's better, the skies are usually cleaner, and I get to see images of things that quite often in the southern hemisphere that I don't get to see up here. If you want to try your hand out at remote automated astrophotography, then why not search for one and try out the hobby for yourself. I also, as I've said before, I've got my Facebook page and YouTube channels, so do look up those. It's called Fred's Astrophotography. There's details of some of my imaging sessions. how to add things like focuses to your telescope, and how to change your setups, upgrade your things, and of course, pretty pictures. On the subject of pretty pictures, which is half the reason why I do this this hobby, really. I'll show you a couple of mine. Now, this one here is the Eagle Nebula. This is my version of the Hubble one that you saw earlier. Now, one final thing before I show you all of my, I'll show you a lot of my work. I have, with the support and help of the Cornwall Astronomy Society, started up a project to obtain dark sky status for the area of Cornwall known as the Lizard. It's a project that's expected to take about 3 years. The idea is to gain accreditation from the International Dark Sky Association. And hopefully it'll be a place where astronomers, astrophotographers, as well as nature lovers, protectors, scientists can work and play in an area where light pollution will be monitored and controlled. Many people have lost the ability nowadays because of light pollution to see things like the Milky Way with their bare eyes, and with small telescopes to be able to see some of the sights I'm showing you on here now. But we'll be helping to bring that back to at least the people of Cornwall. Now, this particular image I'm showing you here is quite interesting because I took out the stars. This is the, I forgot what the name of it is, Crescent Nebula. And to show all the detail in the crescent, I took the stars out of it. It was quite stunning, I thought. More, yeah. This is actually one that I took a fair few years ago, but I reprocessed fairly recently. Anyway, thank you very much. This has been a privilege to have been invited this evening. I hope you take away something from this brief introduction to my passion. And if you've got any questions, then please feel absolutely free to ask them now. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Fred. Super talk and really, really interesting. So I think we've had 1 or 2 questions come through, which I'll get to in just a second. As we mentioned at the start, if you have some questions, do post them in the chat. If you'd like to ask a question by turning on your microphone, just let me know by popping that in the chat, and I can come to unmute there. So I guess well, let's just jump. I've got a few questions myself, but let's jump into the ones we've got here. So let's see.
Well, Roger's come up with one about amateur and highly sophisticated software. The software, most of the software that I use, it's really just a front end. It looks more complicated than it really is. Okay, all it does is look after the drivers. So every part of a telescope, whether it's a focuser or the camera itself or the filter wheel, they've all got drivers. And what it really is a front end to those drivers. It does look sophisticated, but Microsoft Word is a lot more sophisticated. It's one of those things that if you want to use it, I mean, now there's a lot of free software for astrophotography out, and they do try and make it as easy as possible. I think that's part of the reason why I use Sequence Generator, because it does look easier than, say, Nina, for instance, but Nina's free. Yeah, does professional kit do much the same? Absolutely, exactly the same. It's just better kit. It doesn't have to be more powerful lenses, by the way. I mean, as you saw, I took a photograph of the Pillars of Creation just the same as Hubble have taken. It doesn't have to be bigger, but it is better, a lot better.
Yeah,
does that answer that one, Roger, pretty much?
I think so. If not,
he can come and shout.
Yeah, I'm sure you can add that in there. So we've had a few others. I guess building on that, we've got a question here from Maria saying, how did you go about choosing your scope in the first place there? And I guess just along with that, have you sort of progressed through a number of different ones over the years?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I started off when I was looking at the stars. First of all, I mean, I was about 18 or 19. I got a small £60 telescope from a company like Jessop's. It might have even been Jessop's many years ago, and that's where I started. And since then, I've moved on and upgraded my kits every now and then, depending on what I wanted to do. Now, at the moment, I've got 5 telescopes. They are of different sizes. So here's a very small telescope, or medium-sized telescope here. Now, most of my telescopes are Takahashi. That was a decision I made a couple of years ago, that I tried them out, and they had a focuser on here which was powerful enough to hang a load of heavy camera equipment on the back. The lenses were very good, so I decided, okay, I've seen a couple of Takahashis, that's all I want now. So I've got those. So you do start off, and then depending on what you want to do, I mean, this is an imaging scope, and I've got one that's much smaller, and I've got a couple which are much larger. So yeah, you can never have enough scopes. Yeah, you're always updating. You know, it's a poor man who keeps this hobby, believe me.
I guess it's a bit like professional photography as well. Always friends of mine that do that always seem to be spending all their earnings on new bits of kit.
Yeah.
Is it with that? You said that they're all Takahashi there. Does that affect? Is it other bits of kit you have to buy that have to be of the same brand?
Same quality?
Yeah.
Not really. No. Used a multitude of cameras. Whether it's a DSLR, you know, £100 camera or £1,000 camera, it's the mount is probably the worst thing. I mean, that's a very expensive mount there, and the ones that I use now. But again, that's something that I've upgraded as time's gone on. It's not something that I've just sort of jumped out and bought. I would think for a couple of £100, you could get yourself quite a nice little setup and take images probably as good as mine. The only difference is you won't be able to take them as easy as mine. You'll be very frustrated and sort of having to play a little bit for it, but you can do it. You know, I know people who've got really the basic of equipment and come out with spectacular images.
Yeah.
I see one here saying people are puzzled by images that show a bit of the local landscape at the bottom, plus a multitude of stars. Surely you need longer exposure for the stars for the landscape, don't you? How's it achieved? It's actually achieved by the stacking process. I hope you don't mind, Ben. I'm just sort of jumping in.
Yeah, go for it. Go for it.
What you do is take long exposures of a part of the landscape. And what you'll do is once you've stacked all those together, so your stars are looking beautiful, you'll see this blurred pattern at the bottom where your the image you've taken, you know, the landscape is. What you do is you just take the landscape out of one of those frames and put it in. Sometimes you can do some light painting, so you can actually have someone in the frame, for instance, then get a torch and just flick the torch across on that one thing. I can even show you actually, if I find it a second, this one right at the beginning, actually, this was a, this one here. Okay, as you see, that's St Michael's mount there. I did nick this, by the way, off of the internet, but I put it all together myself. This is a thing of the Milky Way that I've got. This was a daylight picture of St Michael's Mount, and just for literally a pretty picture, and so I can put automated astrophotography on there. It was just one frame pasted on it, where you're right, the stars there, those were good 5-minute exposures on everyone.
So you need to have a bit of editing mastery to be able to.
Yeah, as I said at the beginning, art. Now there is a difference. You mustn't. We're very careful to make sure that people know when something's art and when it's close to what it really is. Okay, if you're imaging with especially hydrogen alpha, oxygen, sulfur, and things like that, you can't get the colours that red, green, and blue are, for instance. So always make sure they know. Make sure they know it's kind of been, you know, it's fake, but it's not, if you know what I mean.
Yeah, that's good. I guess it's important to keep the I guess the integrity there. Yeah, knowing
That's right.
when
Yeah.
it's not and when it is.
I know that there are a lot of people, especially there was one guy which took a photograph of the. Take this one down a minute. I don't even. You can see it. This is that Comet Neowise. Sorry, all you can see is the screen, isn't it? But
I think
yeah,
there you go. That's good. Yeah.
All right. Now that's the big comet that came around last year, and he took what looked like the best image you've ever seen of it. And we found out that he'd actually painted little swirls inside it, and he tried to make out that it was real, even though it was debunked and found out that it wasn't. If right at the start he said, I took a picture of Comet Neowise and I've enhanced it or changed it or something like that, we would have said it was absolutely fine. You know, in normal non-COVID times, do you guys get together? No, not at all. We've been very good at keeping apart. I have got another guy from the Cornwall Astronomy Society, which is next door but one, and luckily next door is a holiday cottage. So there's been many times where we've been shouting across this spare garden backwards and forwards as we've been doing things, but no, we haven't met at all. A lot of us are. I'm probably one of the youngest ones, other than Natalie, of course, in the Cornwall Astronomy Society. I'm very aware that this COVID is very nasty as you get older.
Yeah, outside of those times, so before, or if hopefully if things keep going to plan, do you then, as a society, do you do sort of group out?
Absolutely, we do practical nights. Once a month, we meet up at a place called Deakin, which is just outside of Helston. It's right on the cliffs. There's a lovely little chapel there, and we go there once a month, make ourselves coffee, biscuits, put our telescopes up in the car park, and spend hours in the freezing cold looking up at the stars and taking photos. So yeah, normally we would do quite a lot.
Great. I've just popped a link for those of you that might be interested when things go back to hopefully something a bit more normal, or anyone who just wants to get involved already. I'll put a link to the Cornwall Astronomy Society website up in the chat there for anyone who's interested there. Okay. I just want to come back quickly, Fred, to when we were talking earlier about, you were saying someone could spend a lot less money and actually with a bit more work could come out with very similar results to what you're able to do with some really good kit.
Absolutely.
So I was wondering, you mentioned that it would take more effort to do. Where would that extra effort need to be? Would that be in the setup, or in terms of using the actual software itself, or something else?
No, it's not so much in the software, because the software will work whatever it is. It'll be things like beefing things up, like your focuser, to try and make sure that you don't have what's called backlash. When you've got gears that are meshing together, you get that null period within the gears, which you can't really have. And that goes for the focuser and the mount itself. The optics, you'd have to make sure they're perfectly clean and perfectly collimated. Collimation is making sure that all of the optics, camera and everything right the way through line up perfectly. Also, when you're guiding with, what do I say? Inferior equipment. I won't say inferior equipment. Inferior is not the word, but equipment that's not so tightly engineered. That's a better way of putting it. You have to, where my mount and my camera will lock onto a star and it will move it by an amount which is much less than a pixel. You won't get that with the cheaper ones. And what you'll have to do is, in effect, fight it all the time. So you'll have to be there changing the parameters as you're going along, because there will be a lot more movement in general.
Yeah, so you can't just sort of set it up and let it go as you would be able to.
Not as easy, no.
Yeah. Okay, no, that's good to know. There's always going to be, I guess, that kind of trade-off when, like, say, if you're spending.
Unfortunately, yeah. I mean, astrophotographers are the worst for spending money. There's no ifs, buts about it. But you don't have to. But it's you don't really get better results, but you do find those results. You don't have to work on your images afterwards in post-processing and things like that quite so much. I mean, I literally can set this off, go to bed, wake up the next morning, and unless a lead has fallen out or a bird has sat on my mount, well, that doesn't usually happen, but you know, or the clouds roll in, that's the biggest one, of course. I can just leave it and then get up at 8 o'clock in the morning and put the telescope away. You know.
Yeah, that's great. That's so convenient. In terms of, you mentioned sort of the clouds rolling in and things like that. I was also wondering myself about light pollution. Do you have to do this kind of stuff away from, say a town or village, and be out in somewhere a bit more remote?
You don't have to. It depends on what you're imaging. If you're imaging a galaxy that's a tiny, very faint galaxy somewhere, then you have to go to a dark sky. If you want some of the big, large nebulas that are around some of the double stars, the star clusters and things, I know people in Las Vegas, in the heart of Las Vegas, who do imaging, and in London as well, and Birmingham. You can do it. Dark skies, though, is where you can go for the really deep objects and do things. But I mean, the biggest source of light pollution actually is the moon. If you're a deep sky imager, the moon is a nightmare. But on moonlight nights, I'll image in wavelengths that the moon doesn't affect, like hydrogen alpha. Okay, I know that the moon could be full and I could be looking at something just sideways from the moon slightly and imaging hydrogen alpha, and you'd never know that the moon was up. However, I could be pointing the completely wrong direction. If I try an image in blue, it'll just be washed out. So you kind of get to know after a while what you can and what you can't do. But there's so much up there of different types of things that you can image, different, you know, every object you can image in a different way. So no, you can do it either way.
That's good to know. I didn't realize that would be possible. So that's very cool. Yeah, I tried to go and see the recent meteor shower on the Lizard. But went in the evening, not the morning. So all I saw was a really bright, shiny moon, and not much else. Great. So yeah, coming back to some of the questions here. Good one from Robin here. You mentioned that you said half the reason that you do this is to get the pretty pictures. So what's the other half?
Well, I do some astrometry as well, which is measuring of things, and like supernova. I've actually done a lot of imaging of supernovas and things like that as well as they're going along. I don't do it for science, I do it for myself. But for every image that I put out, there's probably another 10 that I've just done, you know, a lot of them for trying as well. Okay. There's also something that happened in March. Every March, there's a let's go back. There was a guy years ago called Charles Messier, and he made up a catalogue of 110 objects. Now, he was a comet hunter. He didn't want these objects, but he wrote up the catalogue or the list so that he would know that he wasn't looking at a comet, if you know what I mean, because finding comets is how you get your name known. Okay, always has been, always will be. Nowadays, we use those Messier objects as being the kind of targets for beginners, because each one was found hundreds of years ago. And if they can find them hundreds of years ago with the equipment they had, you can find them now very, very easily. There is one point every March where it's possible to see every single one in the sky if you stay up throughout the whole night. So I did a Messier marathon. Lots of people have done it before where they've seen these Messier objects throughout the whole night. I wanted to image them. I wanted to be the first person to do that. And I wanted over 100 objects, and we got over 100. I think we got 103. And it was 12 hours of imaging, and it was brilliant fun. And on that particular occasion, I had to be there the whole time. So yes, if you've got something like 12 hours spare, I think it was about 10 hours, I put onto YouTube. There is a YouTube video as I'm doing it.
That's brilliant. I will, in a moment, I'll post a link to your YouTube and your Facebook page for everyone to go have a look at as well. That sounds fantastic though. What an amazing 10 hours that would have been.
Right, is my setup indoors? No, always outside. The changes in temperature between outside and inside are too much. And there's one telescope downstairs that I've got that I tend to put out into a cool box probably 5-6 hours before I'm going to use it, because it takes so long to cool down. Even at night, if I take it out from my warm room outside, it will take 2 or 3, 4 hours to cool down. So no, you definitely can't do that. You've got to have the setups outside. Do I have anything to do with the asteroid tracking and logging project? No, I haven't. No. There's one for the Cornwall Astronomy Society link. What about solar photography? Did you manage to image the Great Cornish total eclipse of 1999? I didn't of 1999, as it so happens. But I did do an eclipse, gosh, about 6 or 7 years ago. So that was good fun. And I imaged it with a very big telescope in hydrogen alpha, which gave quite a lot of detail, which was nice. One other thing that actually this telescope here is a small telescope. One of the reasons that I've got it set up and it's always beside me is if there's transits, so you can have things like the International Space Station going in front of the sun or the moon. I've got a sun filter for this, as well as moon filter, of course. So the idea, I haven't done much of it yet, but I want to do a lot more of doing some of the transits as well. So that'll be good fun. And it doesn't have to be the International Space Station. I did get Mercury going in front of the sun year before last, I think it was. And also I'd like to get an aircraft going in front of the moon. I think that would be a good one to do.
That would be. I'd imagine with that, I'd imagine take a bit of timing, but would that require a bit of luck as well?
Oh, a massive amount of luck, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, if you get one, we'll keep.
Well, it depends on where I am. I mean, if I'm right beside Heathrow Airport, probably not as much luck, because you can just move where you are on the ground. And of course, you've got the angle where the moon is, and you could pick up. And I can imagine that's how a lot of people would do it.
Yeah, that would make sense. A lot of sense. So I think that's all the questions we've had in the chat so far. I've got a couple I'd like to ask. And if anyone's got any more questions, do pop them in. Otherwise, we'll bring it to a close after that. You mentioned the remote automated astrophotography, so doing stuff with scopes in Spain, Australia, places like that.
Yeah.
How does that work? Is that sort of teaming up with someone else and they go and set things up for you? Or
funny enough, when I put my telescopes out, because of the way that it's connected up to a computer, my computer on the telescope is connected up to Wi-Fi. In other words, the internet. Okay, and the software that I use, I've done it before, where a guy called PK down in Australia, he doesn't get to see some of the things we've got up here, and just say, okay, well, my telescope's outside, here's the login details, use it. And he can use the telescope up here, and it's exactly the same. We can use the telescope down there as well. It uses the same software, or almost always the same kind of software anyway. And it's, I've used iTelescopes quite a bit, actually, for imaging some of the things down in the southern skies that I certainly can't see up here. And it's kind of good fun, especially if you're bored at work on a Friday, lunchtime. You think, because of course lunchtime here is nighttime over in Australia, you can log in, have a look, see what's there, image some stuff.
That's very cool.
It can be quite expensive though, so it's a nice thing to try. It's a nice thing to have some credits, so that if something does happen, like a new comet or whatever, you're ready, you can just log in and do it. But to do it all the time, it would be a very, very expensive way of doing the hobby.
Yeah, and it sounds pretty expensive in the first place. So
yeah, I know.
That would be tricky. I had another question from Roger or Robin here. Just looking at, so saying that you didn't necessarily understand quite what you said, but when you're
the moonlit night.
Yeah. For other things other than the light there, what kind of things can you start?
Well, the thing is with moonlight is basically sunlight. Okay, so when there's a full moon out there, you're really getting sunlight that's coming down onto that's shining back to us. And what we're trying to do with my type of astrophotography, I have taken photographs of the moon, of course I have lots of them, but most of the time I want to take images of really deep sky objects which are very, very faint. And moonlight just washes that light out completely. You can't even cut through to see. Next time there's a full moon, you have a look up and see if you can see any stars. You won't be able to see the Milky Way or anything like that. It does wash everything out. But with certain filters, I can use at those times. And because my imaging means that I can start imaging a certain object on one day and then another day, go straight back to that object and carry on my exposures. I can always go back to it and fill in when there's less moonlight of some of the others. And it tends to be about 10 days really in every month that the moonlight's out. And in those times you think, okay, going to do my hydrogen alpha, and then sort of 4 days either side of a full moon, I can do my sulfur imaging, and I can do my red imaging 10 days afterwards, and then when the moon's not there, I can use anything I want. So it just takes a little bit of getting used to what time of the month it is and what you want to, it depends on the target as well.
I guess that's good to be able to know that regardless of what's in the sky, as long as it's not too cloudy, there's always something you can put the scope on.
Absolutely, there's always something, no matter what equipment you've got, what filters and things you've got, but it might not be what you've set out to image. Quite often my images are made up of 20 hours of a particular object. Now what I don't want to do is photograph just because the moon's out something completely different. I want to always go to that object until I've done those 20 hours, otherwise I'll always have unfinished images. Yeah. Yes,
no, that makes a lot of sense. I've had another question from Robin here. Yeah, so do amateur photographers as a community have anything comparable to the big arrays electronically networked telescopes for a wider view that you can create between you all?
Yeah, what he's talking about is different people around the world using their astrophotography equipment to amalgamate. As you know, we stack images together to get rid of things. It has been done a couple of times. In fact, about 5 years ago now, the BBC did a thing where everybody, whether you've got a telescope or whether you've got a mobile phone, take an image of the Orion constellation, and they put it together. Kind of showed that it's not a good idea, didn't work out very well. But yeah, these things have been done before. I think, astrophotography is a fairly new thing, really. I mean, it couldn't have started until electronic cameras came around, ones that didn't use films. That, obviously for a young person, they go, well, they've been around forever. They haven't really. It's only been a very short period of time. And it's only now they're starting to get really good because people have realized that you can point them at the night sky. And from your DSLRs, like this one here, specialist astrophotography cameras are coming out now, albeit a bit expensive at the moment, but they will get cheaper. I think it's something that will happen. Yeah, I mean, certainly we've measured things through parallax before stars from different sides of the Earth. We did, it was telescopes, ground-based telescopes that took images of the black hole in M86, the galaxy up there, and first imaged the black hole. Although that's professional, amateurs can do more and more as time goes on, I think. So quite possible that we will do properly for science in the future. We kind of haven't yet, because I think every astrophotographer, when there's a clear night, we've become very self-centered. We know that we want a picture of something that we've been trying to get up there, or that we've seen in a magazine and want to get ourselves, and forget everybody else. We're just going for that. And of course, if everybody's doing that all the time, because at the end of the day, I do this for pretty pictures. I kind of lost a lot of my eyesight about 10 years ago, moved from astronomy. I couldn't look in an eyepiece very well anymore to astrophotography. Yeah, I just love it. Yeah.
Yeah, it shows in the work and the pictures that you produce. So
Okay.
I think that's bringing us pretty much towards the end here. I haven't any more questions. So one of the things I just want to talk about is you've been doing this for a fair while. How long did it take you to get to the stage where you were sort of happy with the pictures that you were producing?
Never always happy. I did it alone. Okay. In fact, I did it completely alone for about 5 years. Frustrated. If something could go wrong, it would go wrong. I even had a telescope catch fire once, yeah, because one of the capacitors went on it. Obviously hadn't been used. I bought this telescope, kept in the garage for ages, because I bought it and didn't realize how big it was, and realized I couldn't get it out of the garage once I put it together. Side point anyway. But I did it all completely alone, first of all. And then one day, when my pictures were good enough that I was willing to say to someone else, I'm an astrophotographer, which was about 5 years, I suppose. I went to the Cornwall Astronomy Society and went, I'm an astrophotographer, I'm wanting to get any other hints, tips. And back then they went, oh, you're an astrophotographer. Great, can you do these loads of talks for us? Show us how to do it. So it kind of backfired on me a little bit. If you're going to a club, probably take you a year, I would say, to, you know, a little bit of time to go out and find a secondhand telescope and get yourself a DSLR and things like that. But I think after that year, you'll be getting images without spending vast amounts of money. You'll be getting images that anybody would be happy with. I mean, you could always start with the moon. I mean, the moon does come up absolutely fantastic if you're taking images with it, even through the most modest of equipment. And the same with a lot of star clusters and things like that. And then just work your way up. As your experience goes up, there's too many people that will spend loads of money and try and jump that experience thinking that money will take them further. I've done that and it doesn't work. So you move with your experience and you start imaging the easy stuff and then work on to more and more complex things as you go along. And the best way of doing it, go to a club, find another astronomer and say, have you imaged the Crab Nebula? If so, what did you find easy or bad with it? Can you give me any hints and tips? The easiest way of doing it, saves you a lot of time and money.
Yeah, that's great. That's good as well, because I was sort of angling for that, to finish that by saying, you know, if you want to find out more, get involved, or just find out more things.
Yeah.
Go along to the Cornwall Astronomy Society, for those of you based down here.
Doesn't have to be our club, it could be anybody's. You know, as long as get together and speak to someone, try not to stress about it on your own, because you do when you're first out there. You don't understand why your images aren't coming out properly. You know, what's going on with these streaking stars, or my mount's pointing the wrong way. There's always someone. I mean, we've got a lot of knowledge of the Cornwall Astronomy Society, but there are other ones as well. Yeah.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for that, Fred. Brilliant talk, some really great answers to questions. So what we do at the end here is we ask everyone, everyone will get a notification asking you to unmute, and we just do, we try and do a Zoom round of applause. So if you're happy to unmute yourselves and do that, we'll just say, thank you, Fred, for your talk today.
Well, thank you very much as well. I mean, you've been part of it with the questions, so that was great.